the pandemic taught us anything, it's that nothing is for certain. That includes your travel plans. Borders open, they close, they reopen again. Masks are required, they're not, then they're required again. You think the surge is over, and then another variant appears. All that can be incredibly stressful on your work, your life, your school, and it can be especially stressful on your travel plans. It's for these reasons that I recommend you purchase travel insurance. This is an add-on expense that you might not have purchased for travels before, but I especially recommend you get it for travel this year. Today, we're going to talk about travel insurance, what's covered, and why you might want it. So there are a few reasons why you might actually use travel insurance. For starters, it might kick in before the trip even starts. Say you test positive for COVID before you take off for your trip. This can help reimburse the cost of your trip that you don't actually go on. But it doesn't even have to do with COVID. What if you break your leg ahead of a ski trip? You probably don't want to go on it. Travel insurance could get you money back for the trip before you've even gone. But travel insurance can also help if your trip has been interrupted partway through. Say you've taken a COVID test midway through your trip. Suddenly you might need to quarantine, stay in a hotel for longer. Your travel insurance can kick in and cover the cost of those extra hotel nights or maybe rescheduling a flight. So what does trip insurance actually cover? My first piece of advice is that you should actually read the fine print because what's covered can vary by policy. That said, there are a few general things that are typically covered in almost every trip insurance policy. The first thing is severe weather. If there's severe weather impacting an area, say a hurricane happened a couple days prior and you're not able to fly to that island, then trip insurance will probably recover those non-refundable expenses like your airfare to that place and a non-refundable hotel that you booked there. The second thing that trip insurance commonly covers is jury duty. You probably don't want to be doing jury duty anyway, and you definitely don't want to be doing jury duty when you've paid for a trip that you can no longer go on. The good news is that trip insurance will almost definitely cover those non-refundable expenses because you're stuck in a courtroom rather than on the beach. Then another thing that trip insurance commonly covers is medical expenses that are incurred during your trip. Say you're out on a hike and you sprain your ankle. Trip insurance can commonly cover maybe a helicopter to actually airlift you out of an area that you can't get out of, as well as those doctor's expenses for that sprained ankle. And then there are also expenses that you're often incurred that don't necessarily have to do with the medical expenses themselves, but come because you have some sort of ailment. Say you need a quarantine because you've gotten sick and you're not able to actually board that airplane. You might need to stay longer in a hotel. Trip insurance can often cover expenses for staying in a hotel longer and rescheduling your flights. And finally, if you actually get sick abroad and you have medical expenses, travel insurance might actually be the thing that pays for it. Often, your standard medical insurance will only cover medical issues that happen within the United States. They might not necessarily cover any medical expenses that happen internationally. Check with your medical insurance provider, but there's a good chance that travel insurance will actually be the thing that covers it. So what isn't covered by trip insurance? Again, I want you to read the fine print as what is and isn't covered can vary by policy. That said, there are a few common things that are not covered by trip insurance. The first thing is super long or super short trips. Many trip insurance policies won't cover trips that are just 1 or 2 days long. They also won't cover trips that are more than 30 days long. Again, read the fine print and see where you're at. The second thing that trip insurance commonly doesn't cover is traveling against the advice of a doctor. If there's some sort of proof that a doctor said you're not fit to travel and you do anyway, there's a good chance that your provider won't actually cover you. And the third thing that trip insurance almost definitely doesn't cover is disinclination to travel. This is a big one that I see often. People say, I can just purchase trip insurance and cancel my trip later because I don't want to go on it. That could be simply because you're too tired to go on the trip, or it could be because you see a surge of COVID in a certain area and you don't want to travel to that place. Unfortunately, trip insurance typically will not cover your disinclination to travel. There is a certain insurance policy if you don't want to go on a trip for a random reason. It's called cancel for any reason coverage, and you don't need any sort of proof from a doctor about why you can't go on a trip. Disinclination to travel for any reason can be covered under this type of policy. It's typically more expensive. Expect to pay between 6 to 12% of your overall trip costs to get this level of coverage. But with it, you can cancel for pretty much any reason, and you'll expect to get reimbursed for a percent of your trip costs. Expect 50 to 75% of your trip costs reimbursed with this level of coverage. As far as standard trip insurance, expect to pay a little bit less than cancel for any reason coverage. Standard trip insurance typically costs between 3 and 10% of your overall trip costs. So if you've got a $3,000 vacation, expect to pay anywhere between $100 to $300 in trip insurance. The good news is many credit cards actually cover trip insurance. Many premium travel credit cards will cover trip insurance for any expenses charged to that card. So simply book your hotel or airfare with that card, and there's a good chance that your travel credit card might actually include trip insurance as a perk. Many premium travel credit cards cover trip insurance of up to $20,000 in benefits. Trip insurance is certainly expensive, and it's something that you might not have purchased in the past, but I highly recommend you use it this year. Even if you purchase it and don't use it, is that really that big of a problem? Consider the alternative. If you have to change or cancel your trip last minute, that could potentially be thousands of dollars in last minute airfare changes or last minute hotel bookings that you really don't want to pay for. Best case scenario is that you end up not using your trip insurance and your trip goes on without a hitch. I'm Sally French, a travel and credit cards writer for NerdWallet. I charge all my trips to a premium travel credit card with a $550 annual fee, but the savings in not having to actually pay for trip insurance are certainly worth it.